on the two-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. Let's speak to Kian Tajbakhsh, professor of international relations at NYU, and he joins us live from New York. Professor, thank you for making the time to speak with us. Iran is portraying the ceasefire as a victory for the regime, going as far to say that Mr. Trump has retreated from its anti-Iran rhetoric. What do you read into this? Could this ceasefire also be a temporary win for Mr. Trump?
Well, thank you for inviting me on. Well, given the communications we've had from both sides, it does seem that that it is more likely, or let's say it's more believable that the Iranians perceive this as a win for themselves, because President Trump has communicated in his Truth Social post that the 10-point proposal offered by Iran is an acceptable framework for the beginning of discussions. Now, that's very surprising if you actually look at the 10 points that the Iranians have put forward, and not in the tweet by the foreign minister, but by the formal announcement by the Supreme Council of National Security in Tehran. That announcement makes the assertion that the United States government has accepted the terms put forward by Iran, and that includes acceptance of enrichment and Iran's dominance and control over the Straits of Hormuz. And in addition to that, a number of other very far-reaching maximalist claims, such as the lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions and the termination of all UN Security Council resolutions and the withdrawal of all American combat forces from the region and the cessation of all war on all fronts, that is to include Lebanon, Israeli attacks on Lebanon. Now, just for your, these are so far apart from what the United States has begun that I'm very skeptical that they can close the gap. But what I don't quite understand is how President Trump believes that the 10 points the Iranians have put forward could be a workable beginning of a negotiation. I mean, just judging based on these communications, I'm very skeptical that they can actually be a basis of constructive negotiations.
Do you think then that this ceasefire will even hold, at least for 2 weeks? And what conditions will be needed to ensure that all sides stick to it?
Well, I think that I think both sides will use this time to regroup. Certainly, the Iranians will try to get munitions from China and Russia to replenish some of their stockpiles. And I think the United States will also probably use this time to maneuver their new Marines and their ground forces for an assault. Frankly, I would be very surprised if this ceasefire holds, simply because as President Trump has said, and the Iranians have said, the ceasefire depends on each side accepting the terms that they have put forward. And President Trump has said the ceasefire will only be honored by the United States if there is an immediate opening of the Straits of Hormuz. Now, we'll have to wait and see until tomorrow and to see whether, in fact, that is the case. But I find it a very fragile basis for a ceasefire. They may hold for a week, but I think in the end, I think it's very likely that that military operations will begin again. Hostilities will begin again.
I want to come back to the Strait of Hormuz in a bit, but first you had mentioned Iran turning to China and Russia, maybe to rearm. What about China's role in negotiations? President Trump had said he believes China helped to get Iran to the negotiating table. Could it help close the gap between the two sides?
Well, certainly China has a very large role to play in Iran's development. That is to say, China over the last 2 decades has invested an enormous amount in Iran in telecommunication infrastructure, in the GPS system, and in addition to military and other kinds of surveillance technology. Not only that, China has played a role in having Iran. I think almost all 90% of Iran's oil is sold to China, which it buys at a steep discount. And so, although Iran plays a very important role for China, I'm sure China played some role in forcing Iranians to think about opening the Straits of Hormuz. But I think at the same time, they were playing both sides. That is to say, if they did persuade the Iranians to agree to open the Straits of Hormuz, they certainly didn't get in the way of the Iranians demanding that Iran and the Iranian armed forces control the Strait of Hormuz for the time being, which would be an enormous defeat for the United States.
How significant do you think this potential reopening of the strait would be? And do you think there's a possibility negotiators could extend it beyond 2 weeks?
Well, I think obviously every market in the world, Asian markets particularly, would welcome the opening of the Straits of Hormuz. But the question is, how sustainable is this over the long term? Because it depends on the conditions under which it opens. If indeed it opens only under the dominance and control of the Islamic Republic of Iran, I think over time this will become intolerable, especially for the Arab states of the region, because Iran would essentially be holding hostage and a veto power over the Straits for the foreseeable future. And I don't think that would be something that the Arab states would be able to tolerate, probably not European states. Whether the Chinese and the Iranians had come to some kind of accommodation or some kind of agreement in which Iran keeps control of the Straits, but China then gets an even greater discount. It's hard to tell. I mean, it wouldn't be implausible, but we have to wait and see if there's any more information on that.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your insights with us. We'll have to see how this ceasefire plays out in the coming hours and days. Professor Kian Tajbakhsh, Professor of International Relations at NYU.